In a city that never seems to slow down, desperate choices can change everything. Jake Hartman, a single father barely scraping by, stares at the last $900 in his bank account, the only thing standing between his family and the street. But on a cold December night, as he checks into a rundown motel with his young daughter, a chance encounter shatters his plans. Across the neon-lit parking lot, a woman sits hunched on the curb, clutching a battered duffel. She's a stranger, but her haunted eyes and military jacket tell stories no child should ever hear. Jake knows what it means to be invisible. He knows what it means to need a miracle. What he doesn't know is that offering her shelter for one night will set off a chain of events that will test the limits of his courage, his kindness, and the very meaning of family. By morning, the soldier is gone. What she leaves behind will force Jake and his daughter to confront secrets, sacrifice, and hope in ways they never imagined. Before we dive in, let us know where you're reading from. If you want to see more stories about ordinary people making extraordinary choices, subscribe and share your thoughts below. Now let's begin. The city pressed in from all sides, the night air heavy with the scent of exhaust and distant rain. Jake Hartman gripped the steering wheel of his battered sedan, staring at the ATM slip that glowed in the dashboard, light $900. 12. That number was the thin barrier between hope and disaster, and it felt as fragile as the silence in the back seat, where Maddie, 8 years old and clutching her rabbit, slept through the city's noise. Jake watched her in the mirror, his heart a knot of guilt and love. He had promised her that things would get better, but the truth was, every day felt like a new test. The eviction notice was still folded in his pocket. He was out of options. Tonight, he would spend nearly everything he had on a week in a rundown motel, praying for a miracle he could no longer imagine. The motel's neon sign buzzed above them, casting a sickly pink glow on puddles in the parking lot. Jake hesitated before waking Maddie, staring at the other guest faces marked by exhaustion and defeat. He paid the desk clerk, feeling the last of his cash slip away, and tried to smile as Maddie asked if they were camping again. As he carried their bags along the cracked walkway, Maddie stopped. "Daddy, who's that?" she whispered. A woman sat on the curb, barely visible in the flickering light. Her army jacket was stained and too large, boots scuffed, duffel bag hugged to her chest. She kept her eyes down, jaw set with a soldier's discipline. The clerk muttered, "She's been out there all day. If she scares off paying customers, she's gone." Jake felt a familiar ache, recognizing something in her posture, that bruised dignity, the way she made herself small but never weak. Maddie clung to his hand. "She looks cold." Inside the room, Jake tried to push away the guilt as he counted his remaining dollars. Maddie's soft voice broke his thoughts. "Can we help her?" Jake looked into his daughter's eyes and saw the same stubborn hope he'd tried to protect. He walked back to the office, asked for a second key. The clerk raised an eyebrow but relented, sliding it across the counter with a shrug. Jake approached the woman on the curb. She glanced up, wary, eyes shadowed by the brim of her cap. "I'm Jake. My daughter's Maddie. We've got a spare room if you need it." A pause, then a nod. "Alex," she said, her voice low, roughened by cold and memory. She followed him inside, her movements precise, like a soldier entering unknown territory. Maddie handed her a cup of cocoa, and for a moment, Alex's mask-slipped gratitude flickered in her eyes, gone as quickly as it came. That night, Jake lay awake, listening to the hum of the highway beyond thin walls. The breath of his sleeping child, the echo of his decision. Had he doomed them to one more loss? Or had he done the only thing that meant anything at all? Dawn crept in, gray and uncertain. Jake checked on Alex's room. The bed was made, the air heavy with silence. On the worn pillowcase, a battered journal and a sealed envelope. Jake's name written in careful block letters. He opened it with trembling hands. "You saved my life. Now let me try to save yours." Inside, a photo of Alex in uniform, a military challenge coin, and a bus station locker key. Maddie stood at his side, eyes wide, asking the question he couldn't answer. Will she come back? Jake looked out at the empty parking lot, the weight of possibility and dread hanging in the air. Something had shifted. His story, Maddie's, Alex's, had just begun, and nothing would ever be the same. Jake hunched over the chipped motel desk. The battered journal and envelope from Alex spread before him, like pieces to a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. The room was silent except for Maddie's soft breathing. Curled up beneath a thin blanket, her face peaceful for the first time in days. Jake stared at the neat block letters on the envelope. You saved my life. Now let me try to save yours. He opened the envelope. A photograph Alex in uniform, arm around another soldier. A heavy challenge coin worn smooth at the edges. And a small brass key tagged with a bus station address. His fingers trembled as he held each item, the weight of their implication settling in his chest. Maddie stirred, sitting up and hugging her rabbit. Did she leave a note, Daddy? Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. The next morning, after dropping Maddie at the motel's makeshift daycare, Jake took the city bus to the address on the tag. His anxiety grew with each stop. The bus station was a world of faded hopes, travelers coming, going, none looking up. He found the locker, heart pounding, and turned the key. Inside, a metal cash box and a stack of letters, each addressed to a different stranger. There was more money than he'd seen in years, enough to keep him and Maddie sheltered for weeks. But the top letter was for him. If you're reading this, you have a choice. This money can save you, or you can use it to save someone else. If you choose the second, deliver the rest of these letters. Each one is a debt I owe. Each one is a chance to change a life. Jake's first instinct was survival. Every dollar was a lifeline. But then he remembered the look in Alex's eyes, the way she'd thanked Maddie for a cup of cocoa, as if it were a priceless gift. He pocketed half the cash for another week's rent, then tucked the rest of the letters under his arm and stepped back into the gray daylight. The first address was across town, a rundown apartment where a young vet opened the door, suspicion turning to wonder as Jake handed over the envelope. Alex, the young man whispered, clutching a photo of his child he hadn't seen in years. I thought she was gone. Word began to spread at the motel. Miss Evelyn, the housekeeper, started leaving extra towels and snacks at Jake's door. The handyman, a former Navy cook, offered Jake odd jobs around the property. Maddie made a friend, a quiet girl named Rosa, whose mother worked nights and trusted Jake to walk her daughter to school. But uncertainty shadowed every step. Jake noticed a man in a crisp jacket watching him from across the street, always with a phone in hand. One night, the man followed Jake back to the motel and stopped him at the door. I'm looking for someone, he said, flashing a private investigator's license. A woman named Alex Rivera. You'd be doing her a favor if you told me how to find her. Jake lied, claiming he hadn't seen Alex in days. That night, he counted the remaining cash. The motel bill, the stack of undelivered letters. Maddie asked, Are we going to lose our room, Daddy? He pressed her close. Not if I can help it. The next morning, Jake found another letter slipped under their door. It was from Alex, the handwriting shaky but determined. Don't be afraid to ask for help. The bravest thing I ever did was admit I couldn't do it alone. Trust the people around you. Jake took a deep breath and went to the motel manager, offering to do repairs in exchange for a week's stay. The manager, moved by Jake's honesty and grit, agreed. For the first time in months, Jake felt something shift. The motel, once a place of last resort, was becoming a haven, a small battered community where the forgotten looked out for one another. As Jake continued delivering Alex's letters, he saw the ripple effects, a mother reunited with her son, a lost veteran finding a bed at the shelter, a family receiving long overdue child support. Each delivery brought its own story, its own hardship, and its own glimmer of hope. But the investigator was still watching. Jake knew a reckoning was coming. The mystery of Alex's past, her debts and her pain, became Jake's own. The more he learned, the more he realized that helping her was also helping himself and Maddie find a new definition of family, community, and strength. By the end of the week, as a storm rolled in and the motel lights flickered, Jake understood what Alex had given him wasn't just a second chance. It was a challenge. Would he risk what little he had left to become part of something bigger? Or would he cling to survival at the cost of hope? He looked at Maddie, asleep with her rabbit, and knew his answer. The transformation had begun, not just for Jake and his daughter, but for every broken soul who found their way to the edge of kindness. And somewhere out there, Alex was watching, waiting, and hoping that her trust was not misplaced. The motel seemed to hold its breath. Jake had never felt the passage of time so sharply. Each day, the walls pressed closer, the $900 of memory replaced by a stack of motel receipts and a dwindling hope. Yet something had shifted since Alex's disappearance. The envelope she left behind was not just a riddle, it was a challenge. Jake spent his mornings at the bus station, searching for clues, his hands trembling as he turned the key Alex had left. Maddie watched him with wide, puzzled eyes, her trust unwavering. In the locker, Jake found the metal box. Letters, dog tags, and a thick wad of cash. But the letters were not addressed to them. They were meant for strangers scattered across the city. A sense of duty took root in Jake. Each day, he and Maddie tracked down one name from Alex's list. They knocked on doors in distant neighborhoods, delivering letters that opened old wounds and sometimes brought healing. A mother dissolved into tears at her porch, clutching a letter from her son's lost friend. A former squad mate, hardened by life on the streets, wept openly in a soup kitchen, the dog tag pressed to his heart. Word of Jake's actions trickled through the motel community. Miss Evelyn, the housekeeper who'd watched Maddie grow thin and quiet, began bringing extra food to their room. Her nephew, recently out of work, offered Jake a ride when his car broke down. Other guests, once suspicious and closed off, now nodded in the halls or pressed coins into Maddie's hand for the vending machine. But the new connections brought new dangers. A man in a dark sedan began appearing near the motel, his gaze too sharp to be accidental. Jake caught him watching from across the street, always present when Jake and Maddie returned from their errands. Maddie, ever observant, whispered, "Daddy, is he looking for us?" The answer came one rainy afternoon. The man approached as Jake loaded groceries into the car. He introduced himself as Carter, a private investigator searching for Alex Rivera. Jake's heart pounded. Carter explained that Alex had left a VA hospital against medical advice. Her family was desperate to find her, and the hospital believed she needed help urgently. Carter offered Jake a choice: reveal Alex's whereabouts if she returned, or risk being accused of harboring a fugitive. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. The responsibility weighed on him. The money Alex left could buy another week, maybe two, but the motel manager had begun asking pointed questions. His job search yielded nothing but rejections. Maddie's shoes had split at the seams. In the middle of the night, a soft knock came at their door. Jake opened it to find Alex, soaked to the bone, eyes hollow but burning with resolve. She apologized. She'd panicked, afraid her presence would bring danger to Jake and Maddie. But she couldn't leave without fulfilling her promise. She pressed a new envelope into Jake's hand. Instructions for the last, most important delivery. "This one is for you," she said, voice trembling. "You helped me remember what hope feels like." The next morning, Maddie found a second envelope tucked into her backpack, her name scrawled in Alex's careful print. Inside was a drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands, standing beneath a bright sun. Family isn't blood, it's who stands by you in the storm. Word spread through the motel, the soldier had returned. Other families, inspired by Jake's kindness, began sharing food, clothes, even job leads. Jake and Alex worked together, helping residents fill out benefit forms, connecting veterans to the VA, and organizing a meal train for those with less. The battered motel, once a place of quiet desperation, began to hum with cautious hope. But the threat was not gone. The motel manager, pressured by rumors and a visit from Carter, warned Jake that troublemakers would be evicted. Jake faced an impossible choice: protect Alex, risking his daughter's safety, or betray the only friend who had ever given without expecting anything in return. As the chapter closed, Jake stared out at the storm gathering over the city. He realized that his small act of kindness had set off an avalanche of consequences, some beautiful, some terrifying. Alex's return had brought hope, but also new dangers. And in the gathering dark, Jake understood. The fight for his family's future had only just begun. The motel room felt like a bunker before a storm. Jake's hands trembled as he counted out their last bills, the envelope from Alex laid open. Maddie watched cartoons, but her eyes kept flicking to the window, sensing a tension she could not name. Outside, wind rattled the thin glass, and the city's lights flickered uncertainly, echoing Jake's mood. The knock came at dusk. Carter, the private investigator, returned. His tone was clipped. "There's a court summons. Your ex-wife's filed for emergency custody. She's using your homelessness and police reports about a missing veteran as evidence. You'll need to appear tomorrow." Jake's world spun. He stared at Maddie, at the little nest of hope he'd built, now threatened by forces beyond his control. "What do we do, Daddy?" Maddie asked, her voice small. Before he could answer, another knock, softer, hesitant. Alex stood in the hall, shoulders hunched, duffel at her feet, eyes rimmed red but fierce. "I heard," she said quietly. "Let me help." That night they sat around the battered table, Alex spelling out a plan. "You need a job, a stable address, character references. I know people, VA counselors, veterans advocates. I'll vouch for you in court." Jake hesitated. "You've already given us everything. Why risk yourself?" Alex shook her head. "You risked everything for me first. If I run again, I lose myself. This time I stand and fight." The next morning, the courtroom was a world of polished benches and cold stares. Jake's ex-wife's attorney painted a picture of desperation and irresponsibility. Jake tried to speak, but his voice faltered, shame choking him. Then Alex took the stand. She told her story, her service, her wounds, her journey through darkness. She described Jake's kindness, his integrity, the way he gave his last dollar to help a stranger. "He saw a soldier when the world saw a problem. He gave me back my dignity when I had nothing. Isn't that what we want for our children, to learn compassion, courage, and honor?" The judge listened, unmoved. "Mr. Hartman, you have 1 week to prove stable employment or in housing, or custody reverts to the mother." Back at the motel, despair loomed. But the community that Jake and Alex had touched began to gather. Miss Evelyn brought food and a letter of support. Tom, the handyman, vouched for Jake's work ethic. The families who received Alex's letters sent testimonials. And even the motel manager, once suspicious, offered Jake a part-time maintenance job and a letter for the court. Alex, meanwhile, faced her own reckoning. Carter revealed the VA was willing to offer her a position as a peer counselor if she completed her treatment. For the first time, she accepted help not as weakness, but as strength. In the final hours before the hearing, Jake and Maddie packed their bags, ready for any outcome. Jake gripped Alex's hand. "No matter what happens, you changed our lives." The next day in court, the judge reviewed the flood of letters and evidence. He looked at Jake, then at Maddie, who stood clutching her father's hand, and Alex's drawing 3 stick figures beneath a sun. The judge's voice was steady but kind. "This is not just about law, but about the best interests of a child. I see a community rallying behind you, Mr. Hartman. Custody remains on the condition you keep your employment and housing." Relief washed through the room. Maddie wept, hugging Jake and Alex. Carter, the PI, nodded with something like respect. The battle was over, but the scars remained. That evening, the motel was alive with quiet celebration. Miss Evelyn brought a casserole. Tom fixed a broken lock. Alex, freshly accepted into the VA's peer counseling program, beamed with pride and uncertainty. "You saved me," she told Jake, "and you showed me that home isn't a place, It's the people who stand by you in the storm. As night fell, Jake stood outside watching the city lights twinkle. For the first time in months, he felt the weight lift, replaced by something like hope. Alex joined him, Maddie asleep inside, the future uncertain but bright. Tomorrow, Jake said, we keep building. For all of us. And as the city's darkness receded, their small family bound by kindness, redeemed by courage, stepped into the dawn, forever changed. Dawn broke through the haze of the city, painting the motel in soft gold, chasing away the shadows and the long, bruising memories of the past year. Jake Hartman stood at the window with a mug of coffee, watching Maddie in the courtyard below, her laughter ringing as she skipped rope with Rosa and 2 other children. The world felt lighter, different, though the scars of what they'd endured would never really fade. Alex had stayed true to her word. She'd returned not as a ghost but as a friend, and something more, a quiet cornerstone in the new foundation of Jake and Maddie's life. She'd found help through the VA and now worked as a peer advocate for other homeless veterans, using her pain as a bridge to hope for others. Sometimes she'd bring Jake along to meetings, introducing him as the kind man who saved me, even when he had nothing left himself. The Hope Fund that Alex started with the cash she'd left behind had grown. Jake, now the motel's assistant manager, expanded it with every paycheck, and word spread. Those who'd once been guest families in crisis, lost souls, now stayed to help others find their footing. The battered motel had become a refuge, a place where stories of despair were rewritten into beginnings. Jake's own journey had stabilized but not ended. He'd won his custody battle, thanks to the testimonies of the veterans, the letters from grateful families, and Alex's unwavering support. His relationship with Maddie deepened. She no longer asked if they'd be moving again, but instead wanted to know how they could help the next family in need. One spring evening, the motel hosted a potluck beneath string lights Jacob and Tom, the handyman, had strung between the rooms. Alex stood at Jake's side, her gaze steady as she watched the community she'd helped to seed take root. Former guests returned to volunteer. Mrs. Gillian, the woman whose son's memory had haunted Alex, arrived clutching a bouquet, her grief now tempered with pride. Jake took the microphone, voice trembling a little. A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything, but a stranger's courage and my daughter's kindness showed me that having little doesn't mean you have nothing. Sometimes it's the smallest acts that change the course of everything. He looked at Maddie, who beamed back, proud. Alex squeezed his shoulder. You saved my life, Jake. But what you really did was remind me what home could feel like. The community clapped, but the applause was really for themselves, for their resilience, and for the fragile, stubborn hope that now lived in the bones of the old motel. As night settled, Jake, Maddie, and Alex sat on the steps, sharing stories and dreams. Maddie asked, Do you think other towns have hope funds, Daddy? Jake smiled. Maybe we should help them start one. 1 year after that fateful night, the local news visited the motel. The reporter asked Jake, What changed everything for you? Jake looked into the camera, Maddie and Alex at his side. A choice. That's all it was. One night I chose to help someone else, and in return the world opened up. The miracle wasn't what Alex left behind. It was what she inspired us to build together. As the sun set, the camera pulled back to show the courtyard glowing with light, laughter echoing into the street, a beacon for anyone needing shelter, hope, or a second chance. And in that gentle dusk, Jake understood. What you give away is never lost. It becomes the seed of something you may never see, but someone else will one day call home. If this story moved you, let us know where you're reading from. Share your own stories of kindness below, or tell us, what would you do if you had only $900 left? Subscribe for more true tales of hope, heart, and ordinary people changing the world, one small act at a time. And remember, sometimes the biggest miracles start with a single door open to a stranger.